There's something our grandparents understood that we slowly forgot. Not because we were careless, but because the system worked long enough that the knowledge went unused. Every generation relearns the same lessons. The timing just changes. Our grandparents grew up in a world where money did not always behave. Banks closed. Credit vanished. Jobs disappeared. Not with drama, but with silence. So they learned early to separate money from wealth. Money was useful. Wealth was whatever still worked when the system did not. And one of the things they learned was how bank runs actually begin, not with panic, but with doubt. A bank run doesn't start when people line up outside of the branches. It starts when depositors, all at the same time, independently, begin asking the same question. Will my money still be there when I need it? Banks don't fail because everyone withdraws at once. They fail because banks are built on confidence, not cash. Deposits are lent out. Maturities are mismatched. Liquidity is assumed. As long as belief holds, the system functions. The moment belief weakens, even slightly, behavior changes. People stop asking about yield, and they start asking about access. Our grandparents lived through that shift. They watched banks close not because the money was gone, but because timing broke. So they adapted. They didn't abandon banks. They just reduced dependence on them. That's why they buried mason jars full of rice and cash. Not because they distrusted banks emotionally, because they understood counterparty risk before the term existed. Cash in a jar did not earn interest, but it couldn't be frozen. It couldn't be rehypothecated, and it didn't care about business hours. They weren't betting against the system. They were just hedging its reliability. The same thinking shaped everything else. They bought land, farms with wells, not because farming was romantic, but because water doesn't rely on credit. They owned productive assets, animals that turned scraps into food, land that produced calories, tools that repaired other tools. A tractor wasn't about efficiency. It was about converting energy into independence. Livestock was not nostalgia. It was mobile, reproducible wealth that did not require permission. They also understood something modern finance tends to ignore. Security didn't come from isolation. It came from community. Neighbors knew each other. Strangers stood out. Information moved quickly. They didn't fortify, they blended. The goal wasn't dominance, it was continuity. They avoided debt that could be changed after the fact. Floating obligations made them uneasy. Got that? No arms? They preferred fixed terms or no leverage at all. They paid for things cash. Because they had lived through moments when rules changed mid-game, and now you fast forward today, banks aren't failing loudly. They're tightening quietly. Credit is harder to roll, refinancing windows are narrower, terms are shorter, and rates float. This isn't collapse behavior. Banks call it risk compression. And here's where modern signals start to matter. Watch the edges of the system, not the headlines. For example, comics march silver, not because silver's magic, but because it's one of the few markets where physical delivery still matters. When open interest stays high into delivery, when spreads behave strangely, when incentives shift from cash settlement to metal movement, that's not about price, that's about stress in the plumbing. Silver, historically, doesn't scream. It whispers. It's a canary, not because it predicts collapse, but because it reacts early when trust and timing start to diverge. That's exactly how our grandparents watched banks. Not for failure, for hesitation. And it connects directly to something else most people aren't paying attention to. Basel III. Not as a conspiracy, but as a rule change. Basel III quietly reclassifies risk. It changes how banks treat assets, liquidity, and capital buffers. Certain paper assets become less useful. Certain liabilities become more expensive. Certain forms of leverage stop making sense. That doesn't cause a crisis. It just reshapes incentives. Banks respond by holding more high-quality collateral, shortening balance sheets, and becoming less generous with credit. Again, not collapse, compression. The same early stage behavior our grandparents recognized immediately. When systems tighten, people adjust quietly. Less leverage, more optionality, greater emphasis on things that work without permission. This isn't panic, it's memory returning. Our grandparents didn't prepare for disaster. They prepared for inconvenience. They didn't chase upside. They chased durability. They didn't ask what something was worth on paper. They asked whether it still worked when systems stalled. That's the knowledge we forget. And that's the knowledge we're beginning to be forced to relearn, and quickly. Because when money starts misbehaving, it's not the smartest people who win. It's the ones who understand confidence, timing, and optionality. The same quiet lessons our grandparents built their lives around. So if you stayed to the end, you already know this channel isn't about noise or trades. Tomorrow, we're telling a story Wall Street rarely talks about. A janitor who quietly outperformed professionals by ignoring almost everything the professionals focused on. And later this week, we'll walk through what Wall Streeters are quietly and actually repositioning into before those exits get crowded. If this kind of perspective is useful, you'll want to be here, and I'll see you next time.